Hello, and welcome to NotesIn9. I'm David Leedy. Episode 143, XPages Component versus Value Binding. Okay, I'm sure you already know this by now, but our dear friend Tim Tripcony passed away very recently as I record this show. And I'm not really going to be too eloquent here, but my thoughts and prayers go out to his family and friends. Tim was just such a great guy. It's a personal loss. It's a professional loss. It's a huge loss to the community. He was always there to share. He was just so smart. He's the smartest technical person I think I've ever met, and he was also the kindest, most gentlest person I've ever known. But he was just always available to help, and that's just what he did. And he didn't help with a 10-word answer. He helped with a 1,000-word answer, and didn't just give you the answer, but explained why things were doing what they were doing. So moving on, I mean, what do we do next? Is the kind of one of the things that comes to my mind. How do we try to honor him, and just kind of remember him and go forward? So one of the things that I did recently with Chris Toohey and Jesse Gallagher, as the three of us, we organized this little memorial and meetup in, I think it was in Allentown, Pennsylvania, just in the eastern PA kind of Philly-ish region, of a bunch of people, and we had a little memorial, and then kind of like a meetup, talking X pages or tech or family stuff or whatever. So if you are in the area, hopefully we're gonna do something like that again, in the PA to down to the Delaware area, or not Delaware, a DC area, I guess. If you want to drop me a line, my information at the end of the show. I'll put you on the list in case we are able to do another little get together, like an X pages and beer kind of thing is the intent, etc. Also, OpenNTF has a really well done idea, initiative to try to remember Tim, and that's this Code for Tim hashtag, and I've got a short link that I made in the long link, and the goal is just to remember that how much Tim contributed back, and to try to use that. Again, nothing really good comes from this, but to try to use that as a spark, to improve contribution. So Tim has a bunch of projects on OpenNTF, which someone could come in and either finish or maintain. And I know that's kind of a daunting thing because it's the Tim, and not many people have the skill set to take up one of his projects. But that's not the only thing you can do. You can make a blog post on something he's done, or a video, or even if it's nothing he's done. A guy the other day, and I'm sorry, I forget the name, took a post that was in some language, and basically put a little extra effort in to translate it in English as part of the Code for Tim hashtag. So just share. I mean, Tim always shared, and people benefited from it. So if you think you have nothing to share and give back to the community, you're wrong. And I'd be happy to discuss it with you, try to help you out, and find places you can share. Just drop me a line. Because if it's been blogged before, it can be blogged again. If it's been videoed before, another take on it, there's nothing wrong with that. If you think you're doing it wrong, but it works for you, share it. And if you are doing it wrong, then someone will probably let you know, and then you'll both learn from it. So there's no reason not to share, and I'm sure I'll be talking about that in other shows at some point in the future. So anyway, moving on, let's talk about today's demo. I actually have 3 videos from Tim lined up. 2 are unpublished, and this one. So this one was Tim actually meant this for NotesIn9, and I didn't get it originally. He put it on YouTube, and I didn't even know he had a YouTube channel. A bunch of people didn't, but I think I was on vacation in Disney or something that week, and Tim pinged me. He told me he had a video with. Then I got back, and then he said, "Never mind that he threw it on YouTube because he just got a little impatient, I guess." So he actually put this on YouTube, and I don't normally republish full videos, but this is an exception. I wanted it. I thought maybe in NotesIn9 we'd have a little more visibility to it, so I grabbed it and I stole it. So don't tell YouTube, please. So anyway, this is a video on the difference between component binding binding versus value binding, where typically we bind to values. There's a way to, I guess, bind to the component. I haven't watched this in a while, so I'd have to go through it again, which I'll do at some point. So if you have any questions on it, please go to Stack Overflow because I probably can't help you with this one. And with that being said, let's go to the demo.
In the XPages world, we're quite fond of talking about how we've bound components to things, whether that be documents or beans or whatever. We're talking about, I've got this component and I bound it to something. And generally when we say that, what we mean is that we bound the value attribute to some EL expression that says whatever value the user enters, place it in this property of this object. So that's, we've all done that. But components also have this mysterious binding property. It's on all of them, and it's been there since 8.5.0. I've seen it for years. I've always wondered what it is. Always meant to go find out. Never did. Well, mad props to Cameron Gregor, because he told me what it is, and now I'm going to tell you. It turns out that when we define one of these expressions, we are not binding a component to this property of an object. We are binding its value. I'm just going to verbally hover on that because we've all been saying this wrong. I've been saying this wrong for 5 years. We are binding the components of value to a property. We are not binding the component to the property. That's what this is for. This is for binding the whole component to a property. So in this case, I've got this page view object, and it's an index of index view. If you want to know how index view automatically gets created as page view because I'm on index.xsp, check out Jesse Gallagher's XPage Controllers project. Go ahead and pause the video to grab that URL. I've tweaked it slightly so that instead of just getting a controller, I also get a model and a view object. So if I'm on index.xsp, it expects there to be an index model, index view, index controller. If I'm on contact.xsp, then it would be contact model, contact view, and so on. So if you want to understand how all that works, go check out that controllers project because this is just a direct variation on that technique. And in my faces config, I've got a few things that are referring to that. But we're going to come back here in a moment to look at why you might want to use what I'm about to show you. So I'm saying this component itself, not just its value, but the actual component is bound to the user password component of my page view object, which will be an instance of index view. So what that results in is, in addition to any primitive data that I or other objects I can store as properties of a bean, in this case I'm actually storing a component, a UI component called user password component. And because this is a valid bean, it has a getter that returns an instance of UI component and has a setter that accepts one. In a previous video, Dave Fleety had asked why I use final. I actually have my Java preferences in Designer set to add final whenever it can. That's mostly for compiler purposes. It's a slide optimization. If I had to manually do this, I probably wouldn't bother, but I can tell Designer to do it for me, so why not? Basically, that just means that once it's been established, it can't be set to something else. I can set properties of it, but I can't overwrite the whole thing within a block where final applies. Sorry, just going to toss that in there because David asked a while back. Anyway, so I've got a getter and a setter. So this is a valid bean, private property, and I can pass it a component and I can retrieve a component. So, yay, I've got a component that is actually bound to a property. But why would you ever want to do that? Well, here's one example. I've got uh, a theoretical credential page, a login page, where somebody can choose to remain anonymous and say, just take me in. Okay, I'm anonymous. Or I can enter a name. But if I enter a name, it's assuming that I'm actually trying to log in as that person. So now I'm validating the password field. Whereas if I didn't have a name, then there's no need to check for a password. So if I enter both a name and a password, okay, now I'm that person. So why does this other technique, why is this handy for that? Well, if you follow my blog or my Stack Overflow presence or whatever, you know I'm always ranting about don't use Git component. Git component is evil. And I have my reasons for that. It's inefficient, it's inelegant, etc. Whatever. But there are two use cases where up until like a day ago, I would have told you, okay, Git component is fine for that. And one of them is one of these validators where the validity of one field, so in this case, the validity of the username, is dependent upon the value in another field, component rather. The reason is because you can't go ask the model. I'm always telling people, go ask the model, ask the data. Don't try to have one visual component, go ask another visual component. Just ask the data. Well, you can't do that in a validator where they're linked like this, because the whole point of validators in JSF is to screen the data to where it never pollutes the model with data that isn't valid to begin with. So you can't just go ask your page model what's the user password, because it won't be there yet. So, okay, use Git component to go find that and ask it what its submitted value is, because for those few microseconds, it's actually stored as part of the component, not part of the model. So this is one of the two areas where I've traditionally said, okay, yeah, it's fine for those of us who tend to use Java for everything to resort to SSJS just so that we can scour the component tree to find that one component we actually care about right now. Well, now we don't have to. We've never had to. I just didn't know we didn't have to. And the reason is because I can have an object that I can place the component in, or rather have it placed in there for me automatically so I don't have to search for it. So how does all this play out? Well, because the validity of the value of this input text, namely the username, is dependent upon the value of this input text, I want to bind this input text to an object that I can go ask for it, and then it doesn't have to search the component tree. So in my faces config, I've defined a validator, specified the full class name, and give it an arbitrary validator ID, arbitrary but still indicative of what it's for, optional authentication in this case. So then on the X page, I've said it has a validator, and here's its validator ID. Because this isn't one of the built-in, required or constraint or range or whatever. This is my own totally custom validator. And it looks like this. Because writing your own validators is not terribly difficult. You just create a Java class that implements this Java XPages validator interface, and you implement the validate method. This will get past the current faces context, the component it's validating, and its current value. So I want to check to see, are they remaining anonymous, or have they provided a password? Because if either is true, we're okay. We'll just let them in. But if they provided a username, so the current value isn't empty, but they have not provided a password, then it's not valid. I need to construct one of these faces messages objects and pass it to a validator exception to throw back to the platform. So to do that, I need both components. I don't actually need a handle on the component that I'm validating because I passed one. And since I'm really only caring about its value, I actually ignore that to begin with. But the key is I need this other password component because I need to ask for its submitted value. Well, in this framework that I'm using that's based on Jesse's technique, uh, it's easy for me to get a handle on the the view portion of my MVC layer at that point. So I just get a handle on my view being basically. Now, depending on the way you do it, you might use the application get variable resolve or resolve variable technique, which actually is what this does under the scenes, behind the scenes, under the covers. Mixing my metaphors, sorry. A little bit hyper tonight. Anyway, I get a handle on my view being, and I know that the platform has given me a handle on the component because on the X page I told it to. So in my validator, I can just ask the view being, well, what is that component? And once I have a handle on it, without searching the component tree, that's the key here. I don't have to call get component in SSJS and have it start at the view root and spider the entire component tree checking to see if the ID matches. Because I've already got the component. I have a bean and it's storing it for me. I don't have to search. I just ask for it and it's there. And so once I've got that variable, I can check its submitted value. And now I can do my conditional validator. So one last thing about this. Normally in our beans, we just indicate a scope, usually private. We indicate a type and a name. In this case, I have marked it as transient. Now, why would I do that? Well, because on our beans, we always want to make sure everything is serializable. Because if it doesn't have to be, it doesn't care. But if it does have to be, it is. But a couple of folks like Devin Olson, Nathan Freeman, and a few others have asked in response to previous videos, so you've marked this bean as serializable, but you're not doing any checks to make sure that everything you're passing to it is serializable. Well, this is kind of a case of why. If you mark something as transient in something that is serializable, when the platform tries to serialize the object, it will skip all the transient things for you. So this is sort of my self-documenting way of saying UI components are not serializable. I don't know why they aren't. Again, chose not to make them serializable. That might have been a decision of omission, not a decision of commission, but whatever the reason, whatever the cause, UI components are not serializable. So just keep that in mind. This is very, very key. If you use this, just make sure that whatever bean you're binding the actual component, not just its value, but the component itself, the whole thing, whatever bean you're binding it to, make sure to mark it as transient. Because then if the platform needs to serialize your bean, it will serialize everything else and it will ignore the component handles. And you don't have to worry about it losing that because whenever it needs it, it's there, but you don't want to store it. You need it to be transient. Otherwise, if you're using the default persistent settings, your X page will blow up because it'll try to serialize the outer object. And when it gets to this, it'll say it's not serializable and simply fail. So anyway, just wanted to toss this out here as just a real quick example of why you would use this property that I've never seen anyone use. I've always wondered what it is, and now I know what it is. So I'll probably use it from time to time. But if you're using get component in SSJS and you've heard or seen me say don't do that, here's one of the ways where you don't have to. Because you can just tell it ahead of time, I have an object, put this component in that object, And so whenever I need the component, I can just ask the object. I don't have to search for it. And so this might be either one other place where everything else in your code is Java and you've been resorting to SSJS just to find a component. Now you can find it via Java. But even if you're using SSJS for most of your code, this is another way to avoid get component. Is if you've got a bean where you can store the component, then you can just ask the bean.
That's the demo. Again, if you have any questions, probably Stack Overflow is your best resource there. And if you have any questions for me, or you're interested in getting on the list for a notification of the Eastern PA to DC area meetup, XPages and beer, or whatever kind of thing, drop me a line and I'll add you to the list. And I thank you for your time.